right, hello, welcome. Brachim habayim, yalla. We're gonna get started on Hebrew today, as has been the case for Sundays for the last little while. Um, Take a look. If you're out there, say hello in the chat because I have no idea uh, who's watching. And let's see. Yeah, my watch is telling me that my phone is telling me that YouTube is telling me that I've gone live, so I should be aware of it. I'm going to try something a little bit different. Hopefully this works. I have my iPad here. I have my little pencil here, and I'm going to try to share a board here on my screen. Not sure if I can make this happen because I haven't bothered to look up how to do it. But if Apple is actually as user friendly as they claim to be, then I should be able to do this on my own anyway. So let me just get the screen going. What do I want? I want to share freeform, and you'll all have to deal with my handwriting if this works. I see hello from Boxer Boy, hello from Ohad, Theta Sigma, Shalom, Sensor. Uh, reading in the chat, I guess it's I want to say Senior Smile, but I'm like Senor Smile. Vex Verity, glad to have you here. I'm gonna see if I can. Let's see, add a board. There's got to be a way to do this. I know there's a way to do this, but let's see if I can figure it out. Uh, if anybody knows, you may all be watching me Google how to make this show up on my screen, but I think I can do it. I think I can. I think I can. Maybe I'll just actually Google it. What language after this? I don't know. I may cycle back. Actually, I do know it's Spanish. Big hug, and I see João Paulo Souza says big hug from Brazil. Thank you. Hugs right back to you. Yeah, Spanish and Portuguese have been on my list for a while. I speak mediocre to bad Spanish, but it's so fun. I'm actually making a video now about Argentinian Spanish, Rio Platense Spanish, and that's going to be a lot of fun. I was speaking to a cantor I know who's from Buenos Aires and was like, "What's your favorite lunfardo? What's your favorite slang? What's your favorite reverse words in Argentinian Spanish?" And there's a lot to choose from. So I'm going to try to continue with the colloquial Hebrew textbook. I also was thinking I might pull up something. I saw something completely ridiculous and a whole lot of fun that I didn't expect. As many of you know, I worked for Rosetta Stone in like 2008, which was amazing until Lehman Brothers. Then then it wasn't so great because I was working on commission, and before the market, too big to fail situation with the banks and everything, people would just walk up and they'd be like, "I want 4 languages. You pick what for." And these were like $500 at the time. They'd throw down their black Amex card. I don't think you can actually own a black, titanium Amex card and hand it to a person. I think you're required when you get that card to just throw it on tables. And anyway, they would do that, and I would, walk away with a really nice commission. And it did not continue after about September of 2008. So let me see. I'm going to see if I can connect. Freeform iPad. This is probably the worst way to search for it to Mac, but it's something other people have searched for. Do 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 do. This could work. Okay, I think I'm gonna figure out how to share my boards here, and if not, I'll just write. I have another option here. But what I want to do today is 2 things. One, I want to share that Rosetta Stone thing that I saw because I thought I'd be able to quit them. And, I had issues with them. Obviously, I haven't worked for them since 2012 or something, 2013. But they have a bunch of new videos on YouTube for all their different languages. And they're actually a shockingly high production value for a company that has not seemingly updated their software in a long time. But they're really good. They're like surprisingly good. So I might share some of those and comment on them, react to them, and so on. I've been watching them. They're sort of a guilty pleasure, and they are trying to address what I think was not great about Rosetta Stone before, which is that it was like a one size fits all. It was the same images and the same vocabulary, basically translated from the same English sentences into whatever you're learning across everything. So uh, let's see. What they did is they now have these videos where it's like they're talking about culture, talking about when you go to a bar in Tel Aviv, this is how you blah blah blah. So that's cool. Let's see. Okay, it's not sharing on my screen, but I really wanted to break down some of the verbs today, in part because there's a lot. I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from really like trying to break this stuff apart, understand the syntax, and then I'm going to continue and build vocabulary from there. Um, Let me see what people are saying here so I don't lose you completely. Portuguese is a lot of fun and pretty useful on the internet. Yeah. Am I going to learn any Indian languages? I learned a teeny tiny bit of Hindi and it was a lot of fun, but there's so many languages there that I'm kind of intrigued by. What do you recommend, Boxer Boy? What should I be looking at if I want to do languages in India? This is connectors on. Let's see if this is that a I don't know what connectors means. Ooh, is this doing it? No. I am. Okay, that's not doing anything. All right, well, I may have to figure out uh, a little bit a different approach here, but this will be fine. Sometime very soon, I'll actually use this correctly. What I'm trying to do I haven't even shared my screen. What I'm trying to do is get this freeform to work here. Ooh, do I have a shared board? Shared by me? Live stream? Why don't I share another? See if that'll work for me. I might not even be, oh, I'm not on my iCloud here, so it's shared on an older iPad. That's ridiculous. I don't think I'm going to subject people to watching me do this. So we're going to talk about not Persian today, not Arabic. We're going to talk about not biblical Hebrew. We're going to talk about modern Hebrew, um, and yeah, that is what we're going to do. I have been going through the colloquial, Routledge colloquial, uh, modern Hebrew textbook with the audio. I see Jecto have an interest in Nordic languages. Yes, let me just for anybody asking, and you can continue to ask, and I will answer every time. If it's do you have any interest in and then X language, the answer is yes. There, like everything is amazing. I'm one of those people who think that every language has something. I will admit I've had a hard time getting motivated to appreciate Korean. It does not speak to me the way that something like Turkish or which I am not studying or Persian or something does in terms of like the phonology, the syntax. There's certain languages where it's a little harder for me to get motivated to study myself, but every language has a unique way of looking at the world as far as like breaking up not just things like the color spectrum and so on, but like really how you think about concepts, what concepts are related to one another, what are culturally relevant. So I love it. Theta Sigma said if you could share resources on biblical Hebrew. If you want, uh, I've heard First Biblical Hebrew Primer is very good. I haven't used it. I have, what do I have? I have Learn Biblical Hebrew by Dobson, which sounds very like it's a command. Like you will do this. And it's pretty good. It's all right. And then I have the classic sort of aggressively philologically minded text that I had here on PDF, which is the Thomas Lambden Introduction to Biblical Hebrew. Um, it's very dry. It's very dry. Give me 1 second, everybody, for my tea. So, hey, Zevel. I see Zevel's here, so good to see you. Um, And I see Korean is incredibly satisfying to pronounce. I think it just feels good to say. That probably checks out. Any interest in Dutch? Is there anything I find cool about it? This is story time. So back when I worked for Rosetta Stone, and I'll answer. There was another question here about what I did for them. I was. They asked us to stop referring to ourselves this way when I worked there. We had a message board, but everybody called it this. So I'm going to just tell you the unofficial name for the job that I held, and that was kiosk monkey. So I worked at a kiosk primarily in Grand Central Terminal, sometimes in Times Square when they had that store, which like was people don't go to Times Square to spend $500 on a language learning software. Is all I'm going to say. I said it up front, and anyway, if you want to see where that store is, it's no longer there. Although I think the kiosk program is just over to I don't even know. I don't know what happened in the last 10 years with Rosetta Stone, but I worked at the kiosk in Grand Central Terminal, sometimes in other places around the city, but mostly Grand Central. That was a radioactive hallway, just slightly radioactive. The limestone's just slightly radioactive, and they're like, it can't hurt you unless you work unless you stay like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for years in there, which I did. But that was what I did. And when I worked for Rosetta Stone, my parents had a neighbor who they had neighbors with a couple. The husband was Dutch, and his mom was going to come visit for Thanksgiving. Didn't speak any English, and I sort of single-handedly got most of the kiosk monkeys into studying Dutch because I found it entertaining. I tried it out, and just on Rosetta Stone, and I was like, these words are the same as the words in English, but it's like if you pick the funniest word in English and then say it funnier. So you don't, chat or talk, you prattle, except for you prat. You don't walk, you lope, right? It's just for a native English speaker, it's just charmingly hilarious in day-to-day stuff. Once you get into like academic language, it's much more like influence from German than English has the influence from French, but Dutch does not. But the day-to-day stuff was great. So I speed ran Rosetta Stone Dutch in I think just under 2 months. My wife did the same, so that we could do what we thought of as a prank, which was like just speak Dutch. I realized that people don't tend to think that learning somebody else's language as quickly as you can to like surprise them with it is a prank. But I don't know. That's what I think of. It's a wholesome prank. So let me see if I can get literally anything where I can write on my screen, and that way I can. Is this even plugged in? Is this thing on? It's not plugged into anything. I think that Hebrew is taught in like the worst possible organization of topics. So we start with Pa'al verbs. If you can all hear me, we start with Pa'al verbs, which have a ton of irregularities, and then kind of work our way from there. And then everything that we use, that we talk about, they're named traditionally in a way that is more or less always an exception. So like PL verbs, the past tense, it's named for the third person masculine singular past tense. That would be PL. That's what the vowels are like. It's IE. But like everything else in that conjugation pattern has a different vowel. So it's like the one exception. So I wanted to go through today, and I was like, I would teach it totally differently. And my wife very helpfully was like, so why don't you? And I think that that's actually a really good approach. I said, because I need to learn it. And she said, aren't you learning on those live streams? So she's very smart, very helpful. Let me see if I can. Do I not even have the pen tool here? I see what I did. I have a problem here. All right, so I'm gonna keep trying to figure this out with the iPad. But anyway, what I want to do is, like I said, teach, or not even teach because you're gonna learn it with me, but like start to kind of study the verbal paradigms in Hebrew, but do so in a way that I think makes more sense. So yes, Pa'al verbs are like the default verbs, and yes, they're a great way to uh, there are a lot of the verbs that you're gonna be using, but I think the smartest way to do this is actually not that. Okay, let me finish setting up my iCloud because I'm gonna make this work. This is I'm so confused. This says that I uh, am sharing it. I see a hello from my father-in-law. Um, I'm not even sure if he's watching right now, but he's texting me stuff in Hebrew. Oh, kiosk kuf, yeah, kiosk kufim. That's exactly what they asked us to stop calling ourselves. Um, okay, let's see. iCloud Plus setup. You know what? There's more than one way to skin a cat. If anybody wants to tell me the equivalent saying in Hebrew, let me know. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is start highlighting things on Pealim, which is a website that breaks down the Pealim exactly as you'd expect it to. So, ooh, got some weird feedback here. So, just as a review, I guess this is probably not a review for everybody. So, as a discussion, um, Hebrew has what they call 7 binyanim. Now, binyanim are conjugation patterns. Um, Sort of like in French, you have re, ir, and I cannot believe that I'm blanking on this, but live streams are stressful. So there's 3 kinds of verbs, but it's prendre, er, re, and ir verbs. Um, Hebrew's got more than that. Biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew share these patterns, and they actually share. So, Biblical Hebrew used to have aspects, right? The ongoing versus like completed action. Modern Hebrew has tenses, not aspects. So it's like future or past or present, and they're related. They have a slightly different meaning. Oh no, let me not click on Zion Messianic Congregation. How did that become the top search result? Um, Even above Wikipedia. Did they pay for that? That's wild. So anyway, these all have names, and the names are predicated on what the form of the third person masculine singular past tense is. Um, Not sure why that should be. Let me make sure. There we go. My for those of you saying I was a little glitchy, my Ethernet cable wasn't fully plugged in. So yeah, as Elvis says, never knew it had so many irregularities. There's a lot. There's a lot, and they're actually very phonologically regular. But for a Hebrew learner, it's just an additional thing that you have to learn, and it's hard to see what the patterns are just by looking at it. So this is an oversimplification, but the idea is that you have the root pa'al, and then you have so we have pa'al, and then you have often a sort of menorah shape here, where you have like this is considered the passive of the pa'al, pl, which they claim is intensive. It can be. Hifil, which they claim is causative. Many causative verbs are hifil, but not all of them are. And hitpa'el, which is reflexive or sort of an each other kind of thing. Again, not necessarily always reflexive. Um, and I see some okay, so some interesting discussion in the chat, mostly about Greek, which is well, one of these days I'll get there too. So these are called these because you take this root, which is pe, ein, lamed, and I can make this larger actually. Too large, just right. Okay, so you have this root pe, ein, lamed, which is like to do, and this is very similar to the way that classical Arabic grammarians would look at things. And so you name things based on like what the structure would look like if that were the roots that you were using. So pa'al is like doing, and there's words like poel, like as a worker or something. But then this is really just the name for the shape of the word. So I don't want to start with pa'al because I think that they are overly complicated, and I was saying PL is probably a really good place to start because it's much more regular. And then you can start looking at exceptions, but understanding a little bit more of the pattern here. Now, part of why I picked that, I'm not going to lie, is that we were reviewing the new edition of the Routledge Colloquial Textbook, and they give a bunch of words, and they're like, here's some words. They say they're going to teach all verbs, and I'm trying to find the page where it had it, but it was like, here's some verbs that you could use, and the verbs, like, none of them were all verbs. I mean, some of them were, and they had exceptions, and then others were just PL verbs. So they had medaber, which is to speak or to say. They had mevaker, which is to visit, and that was in the dialogue that we had before. So I was going to look at those first. And medaber is perfect because it doesn't really have, like, there's not a lot that lends itself to exceptions. By the way, the new version of this textbook, for some reason, doesn't reliably have the accent marks over the stressed syllable here. So you just have to know that it's Boker and Lila. I have no idea why they got rid of those. There's also, on a couple of pages, some just extraneous Hebrew, which looks like it's a placeholder that they were going to add something and then didn't add it. So it's very, very strange. We can't really have nice things. And I was talking with my wife about this because it's like, why is this not as good as the other colloquial textbooks? And I said, well, let's think about this. Like French, there's probably more people learning French in the United States. There, in all likelihood, maybe even in Canada, than anybody who would be learning Hebrew. There's 14 million Jews in the United, and not in the United States, in the world, and less than 14 million. And of them, not everyone wants to learn Hebrew. So it's about 6 million Hebrew speakers. Not everybody wants to learn it. So it's like it's a much smaller market, and we get things with some errors every now and then. So we're going to look at levaker and ledaber, and I think hopefully this will be helpful for people. It'll definitely be helpful for me, which is selfishly why I do these live streams. So let's do a search here. We're going to search, and I think there's an important thing here. As he speaks with a missing medaber subject. What am I saying? Okay, look at the medaber. Help me understand what we're talking about here. I'm not clear on it. So let me say, oh, I got it. Medaber is he speaks with a missing subject. Thank you. What I'm seeing when I look at the chat when you switch to Hebrew is it gets separated into the wrong places. So it actually is not great. If you're not familiar with payolim.com, you can literally point and click if you don't have a Hebrew keyboard, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. And I'm going to look up ledaber. It's a great resource. It does have ads, which is why it's .com. So we have, okay, ledaber's root is daled beit resh. We have red for where the stress is. It's the infinitive to speak or to talk. So I'm going to click on that, and we're going to see, and this is exactly why I chose this. This root does not have any special conjugation properties. That's exactly what I wanted to say. So, yeah, Zevel is adding to be verbs always start with lamed. And that's kind of something that I wanted to point out. So there's two tenses. There's a present tense now too that's from the participle historically. So we'll start with the present because that's where everybody starts. It's fairly easy because it historically was a participle and didn't have as many conjugations. So you just have like masculine, feminine, singular, plural. So medaber, medaberet, medabrim, medabrot. Not medaberim. That's a regular phonological thing, which should hopefully make sense to people that it sounds better. It's easier to say medabrim, medabrot. So far, so good. Then you have past tense here. I am skipping this because I think this is not the way to introduce it. Because what I want to do is point out, and why don't I make this bigger too? I want to point out, so we started with medaber, medaberet. Already, you should notice a relationship here between medaber and the infinitive, which is all the way at the bottom. Ledaber. I stress that too. It's contrastive emphasis, so ledaber. But le, so you have me for the present, you have le for the infinitive, right? And it's always edaber, right? That's what you got. Now, skipping the past tense, I'm going to come here to the future and notice something. So aleph historically was a glottal stop. It no longer is, but historically it was there. That's pronounced in the back of the throat. That lowers vowels. When you produce things, sounds here, that lowers vowels. So a becomes a here, adaber. But then everything else, what you have is a prefix. And that's why sometimes in biblical Hebrew these are referred to as the prefix conjugations. So we will speak. It's still this stem, edaber, but you have the na from anachnu. Second person, tedaber. Third person, yedaber. Right, so it's edaber for everything. The imperative, daber. And somebody can tell me in the chat if people actually use the imperatives in these ways. My understanding is that there is an imperative form, but more often than not, people will use the future instead of the imperative because it's considered a little bit more polite, with a handful of exceptions like very, very common words like sitting or something. But my understanding is that, daber might not be the imperative. Somebody can tell me in the chat. Doesn't really detract from my point here about this being a very regular pattern. So we got a few exceptions. And of course, this star here, as Evel pointed out, people don't say to daberna. That's for the sake of completeness, and maybe you'll see it in the Tanakh, but you're not going to see it in regular speech. So I see in some cases use the imperative exclusively, but sometimes it sounds too weird. That's what I hear. It depends on the person, it depends on the verb, it depends on habits. So just really quickly, what we have, there's a couple of phonological patterns here, but with a root like daber, where there's no sort of weirdness to the root, what you have is this sort of stem. I think I can see that on the screen, edaber, and it kind of carries through everything. So you have ledaber as the infinitive, medaber is the present, and then medabrim, medabrot, whatever, medaberet, but it's medaber is that sort of base, root to it, stem, I guess I want to say. And then you have things like nedaber for anachnu, tedaber. If it's second person feminine, it's tedaber, and then you add the e at the end. And what that does is, for phonological reasons, you get rid of that last sort of e vowel. So you give tedabri. Again, I know my pronunciation will need work, but I'm just like thinking about this system. Plural, tedabru. And you see the plural is going to be u all the time. Yedaber, third person plural, yedabru. And then this is a thing that always sort of confuses people, where third person feminine, she will speak as tedaber, and that's the same as second person masculine. But the way that I think of it is, like, really what you have here is a system where you have edaber underlyingly. In the first person, aleph lowers the vowel, and the aleph is related to ani. In the first person plural, you have nedaber related to anachnu. The second person, you have tedaber as sort of the base form, and then you have a feminine suffix e and a plural suffix u. In the third person, you have yedaber, so the same stem, and then the plural is yedabru, and the feminine, instead of being like yedabri, which seems like it would make sense, it's tedaber, and you just have to remember that. But that's across all of these. So that is the future. And that's all, like, not just the future, but the future, the infinitive, the present. That's all the same thing, just getting different prefixes. So, and the prefixes are actually related for the most part to the pronouns, right? Like anachnu, nedaber. So super duper easy. Then you have the past. And the past, I am annoyed at calling these PL verbs by saying that it's the vowels are EA, because look, you have diber is the third person masculine, but that's the only one that has that vowel there. I actually have a theory about this, a phonological theory about this, how I would analyze it. that I will come back to in a moment, but I think it's a pretty reasonable analysis for linguistics, which I'll share with you in a moment. But I want to kind of go through these. So the stem here for the past is dibar. P. I think it should be called a PL verb instead of a PL verb. I understand why third person masculine singular. It actually does help you that it is the exception, because then you remember what the exceptions are when you learn them. But taking the same roots, past we have dibarti, dibarnu, dibarta, dibart, dibartem, dibarten. These, somebody can let me know if anybody actually says these. Diber, dibra, dibru. Now, what's going on here? You have dibar, and then you have literally parts of the pronoun just smushed onto the end of this word. And historically, this is how this happened. It was a pronoun and it got smushed onto the end. So this is related to ani, dibarti, anachnu. This is the nu from anachnu. And you can really see it with ata, at, atem, aten. You have, and we talked last week about me not aspirating those, so I'll try my best not to, but I'm getting excited and my accent's coming out stronger. So ata, dibarta, at dibart, atem dibartem, aten dibartent. It's literally just smushed onto the end there. For third person masculine singular, you have no suffix. And then for the feminine, you have a, which just feels normal and natural for European language speakers because it's always the feminine. And the plural, just like in the other paradigm, is u. Okay, so there's a lot that repeats here. Now, here's my linguistic theory, and this is something that may be unfamiliar for people who are language enthusiasts but haven't studied linguistics. One of the big things that you have to wrap your head around when you start learning linguistics is the possibility that there's something there, logically, in the grammar, in the language, mentally, abstractly, that is not there in terms of being spoken or written on the page or something. So it's null operators. If you speak a language like Italian, where you can drop the pronouns, you can have this idea of like there's an unpronounced pronoun, but it makes sense in the sentence. So here, what I would argue is that for the third person, it's I'll just say it like it's English, DIBR, with a suffix. And the suffix is u for the plural, a for the feminine, and it is a null suffix for the third person masculine, which is not pronounceable. You can't say dibre in Hebrew. So an e gets added to it, diber, sort of a neutral vowel. Lots of languages add an e or a schwa sound when they need to kind of fill sounds where it's like the morphology has too many consonants, you got to add a sound. The default additional sound in Persian is sort of an a sound. Here diber makes sense to me. So what we have here is with roots that don't have changes, with a PL verb. In this case, we're looking at ledaber. Just to kind of review all of this, the infinitive ledaber. The present, you replace the lamed with a mem, medaber. Any of the future, you replace the prefix with something that's related to the person, gender, number. So, anachnu nedaber. Ani is the weird one because the aleph historically used to be pronounced, like actually produced in the back of the throat, and that always has the effect of lowering where your tongue is in your mouth, and so that makes a kind of move to a. But that's the only thing to sort of remember here. Otherwise, it's pretty regular. And you have these like, we can say, if I wanted to analyze this, I'd say, okay, so the n, first person plural, ta is second person, right? It carries all the way across second person. And then ya is third person, u is plural marker as a suffix, and for whatever reason, the ya is overridden in the feminine for tedaber. So not super duper hard, and you see it over and over again, and you can actually memorize it. But for me, understanding this pattern helps me memorize. And the main problem that I had is when you look at Pa'al verbs, the pattern is obscured. I looked at, there's like 45 Pa'al verbs that Duolingo teaches in their like first verb lesson. And of those, it was like 5 were regular. Everything else had some sort of phonological exception. And so it's really, really hard to figure out what the phonological pattern is. So for a verb like edaber, ledaber. For a verb like ledaber, I can say it's ledaber, and I have to remember the past name is dibar. It traditionally would be claimed that it's PL, so it's diber, but for me, I think of it as dibar. Dibarti, dibarnu, dibarta, dibart, dibarten, dibartem, diber, dibra, dibru. Right? I'm just adding the suffixes. So now, let's see. One common Hebrew mistake is saying ani yedaber, which is incorrect. The correct one is ani adaber. There's this thing called, and I can't actually see it because there's a little. My option of leaving a heart on the chat is actually blocking the word here. Oh, itan, itan. Yeah. So the what do you say? Otiot itan. Itan. So that's aleph, yud, tav, nun. That is the sort of mnemonic for these, right? Aleph, yud, tav, and nun up here. So we've done something regular. Now let's look at one that's slightly less regular. This is also from the textbook and like the first two chapters that we've looked at. So this is to visit someone. I remember mevaker is visit because me vacation. Like when I visit people, I do it on vacation, and for some reason mevaker, like mevaker, it makes sense to me. If you're Jewish, you probably know about Bikur Cholim, which is visiting the sick. That's the same root, Bikur. But we're going to look at this. So levaker is to visit or to criticize. Insert your own joke here. Actually, please do leave me leave me something in the chat. Oh no, ads. Okay, so yeah, to visit and to criticize. I feel like there's a mother-in-law joke in there. If anybody wants to do that, by the way, for my mother-in-law, hello, hi, I love you. It's not about you. Um, but lots of other people may have that experience. So we're gonna look at the same thing. Why did I bring this one up? It's exactly the same, except for. See, Danisha says, "Yo, it's Verbs Day." Yeah, it's exactly. So this is exactly the same pattern, with one exception, which is the bait is now behind a vowel. It's following a vowel. It's after a vowel. I'm going to say it as many ways as I can. So when a vowel precedes it, then it doesn't stay ba, but it becomes va. So that's it's not really an exception. It's a very regular phonological pattern, but it's something that as a non-native speaker, as a learner of Hebrew, I have to remember. So same thing. We got the same pattern. Levaker, to visit, and again, avaker, it's lowered by the aleph. So the aleph, and I don't know that I have a good mnemonic for this, but I feel like just aleph, like that does it for this. We're going to see some differences where if the vowel is e for other conjugations, then the aleph makes it a, but it just always lowers it. It always lowers it by one. So if you're familiar with, I'll just show you. IPA vowel chart. Let's do this. All right, we don't need to look at all these vowels because Hebrew only uses like 5 of them, but we're gonna have a quick excursion here. Aleph is a glottal stop. Historically, again, not anymore, but used to be a glottal stop. And what that means is that it's a closure at the glottis. Constricting these muscles, if you can see me doing it, like I'm a Cardassian, constricting these muscles causes your tongue root to move back and down. It just does that. So, because there used to be an aleph that was pronounced there, if something has this, I'm not going to take the whole chart. If something has this E, that usually becomes like A or Eh. If something has A or Eh, like somewhere in here, like Hebrew does, if you have a glottal stop before it, then that might become something more like A or even Ah. So that's sort of what's going on here. So I said in Israel, learn the same thing. Yeah. The Cardassian neck. Yeah, you just tense it just as much as you can. So avaker, nevaker, right? Only thing to remember is the spirantization of bait, and the same thing, tevaker, tevakri, tevakru for the future. So for me, I feel like as I learn verbs, if I can put this into the present, the future, the past, then I can really start to use it, as opposed to like, okay, I've memorized in the textbook. They're asking about Boris and Sonia's cousin Jan from Holland, and he says, what are you doing here, Baaretz? And Jan says, "Ani mevaker mishpacha." If I only know "Ani mevaker," that's great. But then, like, what if I want to say, "Well, I'm going to visit mishpacha next week"? Then I have a problem, right? Or what if I'm going with my wife? We're visiting. So I want to be able to say all of these things as soon as I learn a verb, and that means I have to understand the system. And of course, for me, what this means is a much slower learning curve at the beginning, but then much faster progress a few months in. Your mileage may vary. So again, same thing here. Tevaker, yevaker, yevakru, right? I'm remembering these. Somebody can let me know if you want to say visit your grandmother. Would you say baker? Like, baker savta shelach, right? Or would you say something else? Would you say tevaker? Tevaker savta shelach. How would you say it? Let me know. So similarly, mevaker, and then notice, because there's nothing before it in the past, the bait stays bait. Bikarti, bikarnu, bikarta, bikart, bikarten, bikarten. It's just this, the pronoun just bunged onto the end of it, as my former professor of historical linguistics would always say. So ani elech levaker et asavta. Okay, but if you want to say, like, Zevel, if you were telling me go visit your grandmother, like be a good grandson, how would you say that to me? You're telling me to do it. Would you say tevaker? Like tevaker et savta shelach. And I left out the et because, of course, I did. Why did I pick Persian and Hebrew, the two languages that have a definite direct object marker? I see lech levaker. Oh, telech and lech. Okay, I see what you're saying. Um, Cactus 777. Thank you for nothing to add, but thanks for learning the language. Thanks for everything. Okay, lech levaker or telech levaker. So we're using some form of either the infinitive or the future of go visit. Okay, so I'm gonna have to ask questions about other verbs now. So having done that, let's take a look at another kind of verb. So what do we have here? We have a bunch of pa'al verbs, actually. Lir'ot, lichtov, lachshov, lalechet. These all have their own sort of irregularities, and so I kind of want to say. Zevel says, I don't even know the difference between lech and telech. So lech is the imperative mood. This is the thing. With our powers combined, we can actually understand the language. I have the linguistic training, but I don't speak Hebrew. You speak Hebrew, but maybe don't have the same linguistic training. So lech is the imperative mood. There's different moods. There's indicative, there's interrogative, there's imperative indicative, as I'm just telling you, I'm indicating the way things are, which actually just made me think of another verb, which actually I believe is borrowed from, the roots are borrowed from Greek, so we get the Greek connection that people were talking about as well. But to indicate. Also, pia, lesamen. I think there's no weirdnesses here either. The final radical of this word can assimilate with the suffix and inflected forms. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll move on to a different thing. So lech is the not the indicative, not the interrogative. I'm not interrogating. I'm not asking you. It is the imperative. I'm telling you what to do. Telech is the future of the indicative mood, which is used. My understanding, this is why I was asking about this. I have read repeatedly that there's a handful of verbs where the imperative is used, but for most verbs in modern Hebrew, native speakers will use the indicative, but they'll use the future second person appropriate form for, like, you will do this, as opposed to do this, right? In English, you will do this sounds very authoritative. It sounds very rude. And my understanding is in Hebrew, it sounds more polite than, please go do this. So let's look at another one of these mesamen. Some of you may know this as siman tov, right? Like siman is a sign, um, an indication. So you can see why I thought of it because indicative mood, lesamen. And then the future, what do we have? Asamen, nesamen, tesamen, tesamni, tesamnu. So it's exactly the same pattern. This is a thing that I can sink my teeth into. I can memorize this. This is a pattern where I'm like, I got the prefix, I know who it goes with. We can go. Slightly differently, it says that I don't know why it's saying that it'll assimilate in these. I'm not seeing this happen. Um, so it warns me that the final radical can assimilate with a suffix and inflected forms. I think that just happens with some that have a nun. I'm saying it wrong. Zevel, how am I? Give me some vowels. Give me a transliteration. What is it? Tesamni? Tesam. What is it? Where is it? Tesamni. Tesamni. Distress, indicated by the red here. I actually really like this website precisely because tesamni, tesamnu. Notice, and Zevel, thank you for that. Notice that what this does, tesamen, tesamni, that's like contrastive focus. Not only do you have the suffix that indicates that it's feminine, but that suffix is stressed. Okay, thank you, Zev. Okay, good. I'm getting it. I'm getting it together. And tesamnu. So like you have tesamen, you will, tesamnu, right? The stress is different and it indicates you have sort of two clues here rather than one. You have redundant cues, sometimes people say. So mesamen, which is like point out, indicate, select, I think. Mesamenet, mesamnim, mesamnot. And then same thing, siman, T, simanu. I see why they're saying it assimilates here. So siman. Do you guys have the N longer? Simanu? Or is it just simanu? And same thing. Simanta, simant, simantem, simanten, simen. Insert naughty mnemonic joke here. Simna, simnu. So, right, we got a pattern here. Now, let's do. We could do a he-feel verb, or we could wade our way into pa'al verbs now. But I think this is, since there's so many pa'al verbs, I think let's do that, and I'll kind of talk about what's going on. So, in biblical Hebrew, always a great place to start. 3,000 years ago, there's a pattern. There's a phonological pattern where you don't have two schwas in a row. So instead, what you get is like wherever the first syllable that would have a schwa, the vowel becomes e, and then the second syllable it doesn't have anything. Now, I think that's what's happening with the infinitive. So like, let's take we talked about lesamen. That's what is going on here? I went too far. Passive forms. That's what they're talking about. Okay, so lesamen. Notice this is like la. This is lamed and a schwa. And then you have sa afterwards. With pa'al verbs, I think the best example that I always remember is to close something, and that's lisgor. Hopefully I'm saying that passably. That doesn't have any exceptions here that are weird in terms of the roots. And so I think it's a good starting place. So I think the rule of Schwa is what actually applies here, because you have two consonants here, the samech and the gemel. And so you can't have lasa gor. Just, you can't. That's just not how biblical Hebrew worked. And so you get lis gor. So for me, that simplifies things because I know I have a phonological rule, and I know that rule shows up all the time. But then this first syllable here is not as confusing to me. Why should this be li as opposed to la? It is la, underlyingly. It's just there's a phonological pattern here in the language that changes this. So, lisgor, you have this regular sort of pattern in the present. So ger, so geret, so grim, so grot. That's very common. You see this in all the verbs. Not a whole lot to say here. Is that what you say? You're learning English terminology? Yeah. And okay, so you have these the present and the participle. The future, I'm gonna skip this first part. It's very similar to what we already saw. So lisgor, the same pattern applies throughout. So you have nisgor, tisgor, tiskri, tiskeru. Notice that this is like it's the sort of unstressed um, kind of thing going on. When it's not the stressed syllable, it's it's translated. It's transliterated here as an e, but it's just kind of a schwa. So the vowel is reduced. So when it's not stressed, that o, it reduces to a schwa. But this should look a lot like what we saw: nisgor, tisgor, yisgor, isgor, sorry, tisgor, yisgernu, and so on. And then same thing, the aleph drops the vowel from e to e. So if you like the approach to linguistics that posits ordered rules where one phonological rule applies and then another applies, as opposed to simultaneous processing. Different people have arguments about all this stuff, but where I think it comes in handy is I think of this as you have the rule of Schwa applies, so it becomes lisgor, and then same thing here, the aleph drops the vowel, so you get esgor. That's how I think of it. Um, I'm sure people could argue about the actual analysis, but that is useful for me for actually learning and remembering it. So they're called pa'al because everything in the past, all the names are based on the past third person, is a. So sagar, same thing, sagra, sagru, and you have suffixes added onto these. It's the same suffixes across all of the binyanim. So sagarti, I'm contrastively emphasizing it. So sagarti, sagarnu, so it's nu at the end. Sagarta, it's ata at the end. Sagart, it's at the end. Sagartem, it's atem at the end, and so on and so on. So this is exactly what we saw before. But you're not really going to see a lot of this with Hebrew because there's so many phonological exceptions. So let's see. We have basic words here: to write, to think, to see, to go, and there's all sorts of exceptions that happen here. So lichtov will start easy. Lichtov, the kaf becomes ch after a vowel. So katavti, right? I wrote. But lichtov, echtov, I will write, right? Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here. There's one more piece, which is where did I go? In the let's see, the past sagarti, sagarnu, sagarta. Yeah, so once you have this heavy syllable from atem or aten added to it, you lose that first syllable. So sagartem instead of sagartem. If you're trying to speak casually, you don't have to necessarily think about this. You're not going to say sagartem. It's going to sound weird. You're going to want to say sagartem. I know that my accent is still an accent, but you get the idea. Sagartem, sagarten, because of this closed syllable. So consonant, vowel, consonant. It's just a heavier syllable. So a lot of these exceptions, it's like, it's just regular phonological rules. I want to talk about two things. Lachshov, notice it becomes la. That is because of the following consonants. So let's look at lachshov here, and let's look at liot. And there's a bunch of these where you'll see similar patterns. Now, there's 4 letters that affect the initial vowel. And those are the 4 gutturals. So chaf, which used to be, if you recall from last week and the week before, it used to be haf. Sorry, not chaf. Het. So it's that like deep in the throat. Aleph, which we established used to be a glottal stop. Ein, which used to be ra and still is for some speakers. And somebody tell me what I'm forgetting. Aleph, ein. Hey, it's H, also down here. So those we mentioned drop the vowels, and so let's just take a look at this. Lachshov, those trigger a lowering of vowels. So the first radical of this word is guttural. It affects the adjacent vowels. Guttural means like in the back of your throat, like the gutter of your mouth. And I see native speakers forget that phonological rule. Yeah, I would not be surprised. Um, Zell says not like we know it. So I've learned I can say sagautem if I'm using that plural there. Jinx. Okay. All right. So choshvim. We see this. Um, and same thing for the past. There's nothing weird here. So chashavna, sorry, chashav, chashva, chashvu, chashavta, chashavt, chashavti, chashavnu. Like super duper regular pattern here, but tachshov, tachshevi. Instead of we saw lisgor, we saw tisgor, tiskri. Now we see tachshov, tachshevi. That's from the lecha. So it's just like it's not that all of these words have their own individual like idiosyncrasies, although they do. It's that there's like four sounds that drop the vowel and they do it everywhere. And then there's also we talked about leot for whatever reason, and somebody can maybe tell me. I'll look this up if nobody knows in the chat today. Um, there is a relationship between the ot ending and a hey. So it's like or a. So like ani. I was gonna say ani rotze, which is a different. So ani roe. Notice first final radical of this word disappears. It turns into a vowel in inflected forms. Middle radical of this word is guttural and affects adjacent vowels. Now, there's one thing that I wanted to say about this in particular. So this vav represents the sound o or sometimes u, right? The vav is both of those depending on which dot it has representing it. Those over time, o raises to u always, and u on a long enough time frame, and u moves forward to e. So you get something like ra'iti, and it may be like, why is this ra'iti when we just saw that it was le'ot? And the answer is that 3,000 years ago, the vav becomes a yud, and that's something that happens over and over again. It's a common pattern in Hebrew, but it's a weird thing to see. And for me, it took separating out from Hebrew that vav becomes yud and recognizing, wait, no, okay, like u or wa becomes e. That's a very common pattern cross-linguistically. So it's not, I don't know, lir ot. So it's not like ra ot e, ra'iti, ra'inu, ra'ita, ra'it. Reitem, and then you see the same thing here, ra'a, ra'ata. So the aleph also has kind of an effect because it's a guttural, right? We just talked about this. It affects the adjacent vowels. So all of this is like a sort of interlocking pattern of phonological rules. But if you want to understand underlyingly what's going on and be able to memorize verbs, for me, I have to start with something like lisgor. And then everything else is exceptions that come off of this. As opposed to starting with something like liot, and then it's like, okay, well, I don't really know, like, okay, maybe that is like I don't know, lishtot, maybe that's like liotzot, but then how come those vowels are all different? Well, the vowels are all different because the aleph lowers it, but you don't know that going into it. So if I memorize this verb first, then what I've memorized is not a framework that I can like hang everything off of, but instead it's some part of the structure that I have to then go back and figure out what the real structure is. I'm seeing some text. Then why didn't it happen in all form of the verb? That is a great question for another time, because I don't have an answer. Offhand, I know where I can find an answer on this bookshelf, but I don't know the answer offhand because right now I'm just focusing on figuring out how this works. But I have some ideas about how that might happen, but I don't know offhand. Let's see, Tal is commenting. Okay, yeah. I will tell you, the more you all type in Hebrew right now, the slower it's going to be for me to read them. So some of them I'm skipping. Dani says they happen with hey, vav, yud, and aleph in the root. Yeah, exactly. Um, and also the gutturals, which sometimes includes resh. Resh used to be ra. There's a great dissertation from a few years back that kind of tracks when it became what people think of as the European R. Um, that is actually there's a this dissertation explains that there's a really strong physiological pressure towards ras becoming ras over time, which is great. And then they try to like identify when did this happen, when did it go to completion. It had started by 200 CE, and it had gone to completion by sometime after 700 CE, which then makes me think, okay, well, when did that happen in European languages? Because Yiddish has the ra, so was it an independent development? Was it something that people already had ra in Hebrew, and then there's an influence in Yiddish? Did it go the other way, like Yiddish to German? This sounds sort of tinfoil hat conspiracy theory-y, but it's entirely possible also that German independently innovated that. There's a Sprachbund with German and French where they both have that ra sound. It could be influence. It could be independent developments in both of those languages. But I have sort of this like idea. It's not a theory of mine, but it's an idea of like maybe there's a relationship between that change happening in Hebrew and Yiddish and German and so on. Let's see exactly what Danny said. Vowels as part of the root letters. Yeah, and so vowels as part of the root letters historically would have been long vowels as well. I see. Is it a coincidence that a lot of the sounds that change in Hebrew stayed the same in Arabic or Arabics? Um, some of them stayed the same. I mean, yeah, I think it is a coincidence. uh, there's all these pressures on these sounds that they may. Historical linguistics is something that I should probably just start making a series of videos about, because the ways that languages change and the ways that they stay the same, and the fact they all change in different ways, but then you can piece together, what existed before, I think is a really interesting thing. Now, I have kind of looked at some of these pa'al verbs. I looked at some of the PL verbs. We still have, hitpa'el and hifil and all that to look at, which we'll do some other time. But the idea was I want to talk about how to break this apart, look at what the underlying structure is, where I can think, okay, lisgor is my word that I can map everything off of. So I can say, okay, if the first consonant is in the root, in the stem, is a guttural, then I know the vowel's going to change. If it ends in ot, then I know it's going to be ani rotse, ani roe, ani shote, ani whatever it is. And so I can kind of map these where I have like a core that I can go back to, and then everything kind of branches off of that. It's sort of a mind map here. And this has been bugging me for a long time, because when you start studying Hebrew, I mean, look at this. They say, here's the Hebrew infinitive, and they give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They actually added some in the new edition, and they're not all, they're not all even all verbs. But look at this. Well, that's got two exceptions, two sort of phonological patterns. Lichtov, that's got one. Lachshov, that's got another one. Levaker, that's a PL verb, right? Lalechet, that's got a weird thing going on with the lamed becoming a hey. So, ani olech instead of ani lolech, or whatever you could imagine it could be. So very and the tough. So like lots of exceptions, or seeming exceptions, in the very basic vocabulary that you learn right away. And like I said, I like to be able to use a verb that I learn in all different tenses the moment that I learn it, especially in Hebrew, where there's 3 tenses. Like, I should be able to do this. But it's really, really complicated when you learn it the way that it's always taught in, I mean, everything from Hebrew for Dummies to the colloquial Hebrew to college textbooks to Duolingo. They give you all of these words, and they're very useful words for starting out, but then you don't know how to actually use it. So you memorize stuff like ef Charlie Hibagesh, we can't meet, or what is this? Blik tovet yefshar lihipagesh. We can't meet without the address. But then, like, okay, what if I want to say we met? I don't know, right? I have to learn how to put these together, and I would like to be able to put that all together right away. So instead of relying on just okay, yochshevet, ani choshev, how do I say I thought this? Now I can look and say, okay, chashavti. Um, but I just think it's a much better approach. It takes longer in the beginning, but I think is a little bit more effective. I see. Tal says I can send you tables that show the subgroups of the binyanim and help map the patterns. I think that's a great plan. They cover the most important things except for Paul, which is a nightmare. So I'm not the only one in recognizing that Paul is a bit of a nightmare. I was going to make, I think I still will at some point, like a PDF infographic kind of thing that goes through like just breaking down Paul and what all the exceptions are, but building it off of a verb, if not lisgor, then something else like that. Um, let's see, male. Uh, oh, okay, yeah, I see. There, we have some other exceptions here. Um, so it's nothing. It's not wrong. It's not bad. It's not broken. It's not ra, but it's just there's a lot of moving parts, and it's very complicated for a non-native speaker to learn how to put those together. So that was what I wanted to kind of rant about today. We're still adding to our Anki deck. I think we're still in Unit 3 right now. So looking at all the things here, shuv and F sha and EF sha and all that stuff. And I will continue with this next week, probably dumping more into Anki and looking at like memorizing things. But I wanted to like talk about breaking down the verbs. And one of the things that my wife and I are going to do is, as we learn these verbs, build our Anki deck out so that we actually have whatever we need to memorize memorized, or we learn the phonological patterns so we can sort of make it background. But as we learn a verb, to be able to use the verb once we've learned it. And I think that should really accelerate things as we continue. It's the logic of the language is really beautiful in a way that's very different from English, that's very different from French, that's very different from Persian, to talk about other stuff that I've studied recently. And so it's really nice to see how this fits together. And for me, the phonological patterns are just this like tremendous, interesting, sort of intricate clockwork of things that are all kind of working together in tandem in interesting ways. And native speakers, you just say stuff and it all works together. But for the rest of us, it's like, oh, there's like 4 phonological rules that apply here that are an exception from what I learned as the core of it. So with that said, I think it's still nap time, but I mentioned last week I was leaving to go do taxes. We're still doing taxes because it turns out when you start a business to to do YouTube, it makes things complicated. When you have a baby, it makes things complicated. So we have some complications. Although I think hopefully, wish me luck. The baby is usually a good thing for people's taxes. There's there's benefits to having kids. So let me see. There's a lot of conversation happening in the chat in Hebrew, and I hate my font here for this. Let's see. אתה יכול למסור על זה. So I'm just gonna. Oh, I see. Yeah. I'm gonna not read these comments right now because at the moment my reading is a little slow, and I frankly don't want the live stream to just be me sounding things out without vowels. So I see U.S. tax calculations with the salute. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I will say just a couple things before I go. There's some things that I wanted to note. They have some time words in here. I'm scrolling up. And this is my last bit here. Some of these are weird exceptions. There's a thing in Hebrew where there are some words where it's going to be masculine and the plural looks feminine. Or, let me see if I can find them. They had all the time words. I'm scrolling. Here you go. So haboker, Lila. Um, Lila it looks feminine, but behaves masculine. So you may ask why. Why is Lila different from all of it? No. But that actually is a good mnemonic, right? Manishtana Lila ze, as opposed to hazot. Same thing. Shavuot. There's a whole holiday. But Hashanah as well. Hashanah is takes what looks like a masculine plural, Hashanim. So when you're learning these from a book like this, it's always worth double checking. And that's another thing that I think is kind of an issue with the way that some of this stuff is presented. So I had nothing but positive things to say about this textbook, this line of textbooks for Persian. For Hebrew, there's some stuff like they should tell us when they say Ashanaz this year. You need to know that Ashanim is the years and not Ashanot, because you learn A goes with Ot and then you overgeneralize and it's wrong. So it should be the good years, right? Ashanim atovot. So just stuff to do. I usually use something like Wiktionary or similar. For nouns and adjectives, I'll use Wiktionary, and for verbs, I use Pealim. And that's what I have. Zeva says, reminds me of this song. Was it the song before, or what do you... Oh, Tal, yeah. Sorry about daylight savings. I'm going to wrap up anyway. So I am going to say, Toda Rabah for everybody. And until Hashavua Haba? Hashavua Haba? Is that correct? Until next week, Litraot. And thanks again for everybody. It's a song in Hebrew. Okay. All right. Thank you all. And I'll see you next week. And sooner or later, we're going to pivot where I'm going to start speaking more and more in Hebrew. I'll make a video in Hebrew. But at the moment, you hear where I am. All right. Until next time, Litraot and Toda Rabah.